A chilling cold case that goes back 52 years has been solved on Long Island.
Police in Nassau County announced that DNA evidence has linked them to the man behind the 1974 murder of Barbara Waldman.
She was just 31 years old.
She was on a family vacation sitting by a pool at the Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri when her phone rang. The number was a New York detective. Marla Waldman Kahn stood up, walked away from her family, found a private corner, and pressed the phone to her ear. 3 words came through the line. "We have a match." Marla fell to her knees. She had been waiting on those 3 words for more than 50 years, since she was 6 years old. Since the year her mother was found dead on the floor of their family home, and the question of who did it became the silent, central fact of her entire life. A warning to our viewers. What you are about to watch is a true story. The following program contains content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Welcome to Crime View Central, where cold cases don't stay cold. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We read every single one. If you're new here, hit like and subscribe. That's what keeps us digging into cases like this one. Now, back to Oceanside, Long Island, January 1974. Barbara Waldman was 31 years old. She was a graduate of New York University, the wife of a local dentist, the mother of 3 young children. She lived with her family in a house on Sally Lane in Oceanside, a quiet, tight-knit community on the south shore of Long Island. The kind of place where neighbors recognized each other on the street, where children rode the school bus home in the afternoon, where a young family could put down roots and reasonably expect the world to leave them. Alone, the Waldman household was full. Larry was the oldest, 7 years old. Marla was 6. Eric, the baby of the family, was 5 and in kindergarten. 3 children, all under the age of 8, in a home filled with the ordinary noise and chaos and warmth that comes with kids that age. A dentist's family in the suburbs. By every outward measure, an unremarkable, comfortable life. By every account that survives her, Barbara was a beautiful person, and not only in the way the word is usually meant. Her daughter would spend a lifetime reconstructing who she was. A wonderful mother, a friend, the kind of woman whose presence anchored a household and whose absence would leave a hole so deep that her own children would spend the next 5 decades trying to understand the shape of it. She was, in the simplest terms her daughter could find decades later, a beautiful, beautiful person. On the morning of January 11th, 1974, that ordinary world was destroyed. It was Eric, the youngest, the 5-year-old, who came home that day. He got off the school bus the way he always did, walked into the family's house on Sally Lane, and went upstairs. And there, on the floor, he found his mother. She was lying in her rose-covered bathrobe. Her hands were bound behind her back. A pillowcase had been stuffed into her mouth. She had been the victim of a violent sexual assault, and she had been shot in the head, left on the floor of the home where she had raised her children. The Nassau County Police Homicide Squad would document all of it, but the most unbearable detail of the entire case is the simplest one. The person who found her was her own 5-year-old son, home from kindergarten, expecting his mother.
I had the image of my mom in my head since I'm 5. So, and it won't go away until I die.
That is not a wound that heals. It is a photograph burned into a child's mind, carried into adulthood, into middle age, into old age, never fading, never softening. The last memory Eric Waldman has of his mother is the sight of her body on the floor in that rose-covered bathrobe. Everything that came after, the whole investigation, the decades of waiting, the eventual answer, all of it sat on top of that one image that a little boy was never supposed to see. The investigation began immediately. Nassau County detectives moved through the neighborhood, knocking on doors, gathering what they could, and they found something to work with. Neighbors reported seeing a man walking near the Waldman house on the day of the murder. Several citizens and neighbors came forward with sightings, enough that investigators were able to produce a composite sketch. The sketch showed a man in a snorkel coat, a heavy winter jacket with a fur-trimmed hood, the kind of thing a person would wear against a Long Island January. It was a real lead. It was a face of a kind. But a sketch is only as good as the recognition it produces, and no one came forward to put a name to it. Detectives worked the case hard. They chased the sightings. They tried to determine who would want a respected wife and mother dead and why. But the leads thinned, and then they stopped. There was no DNA technology in 1974. nothing that could turn the biological evidence at the scene into an identity. The sketch led nowhere. The witnesses had given everything they had, and it wasn't enough. The murder of Barbara Waldman, a 31-year-old mother of 3, slid into the cold case files. It became one of Nassau County's long-running unsolved homicides, joining the hundreds of thousands of unsolved violent crimes that sit in evidence rooms across the country, waiting for a future that may never arrive. For the 3 children she left behind, life had to keep moving, even though it could never be whole again. Their father, Dr. Jerry Waldman, the local dentist, remarried about 6 months after Barbara's death. The young children accepted his new wife as their stepmother. And the family did what a great many families did with that kind of grief in that era. They sealed it away. It was tough growing up, Eric said. We didn't talk about it. And then, the detail that says everything about how that family survived. The pictures came off the walls. 1, 2, 3 pictures of his mother, taken down from the house until there was nothing of her left on display. A mother erased from her own home, frame by frame, as if her absence could be managed by removing the evidence that she had ever been there at all. 3 children growing up in a house where the most important person who had ever lived there was a subject no one was allowed to bring up. This case took more than 50 years to crack. This channel takes weeks for each story, real records, real families. If Barbara's story is getting to you, hit like and subscribe. That's how CrimeView Central keeps going and keeps cases like this from going cold. Stay with us, but silence has a way of failing eventually. As the Waldman children grew older, the questions they had been taught not to ask started rising to the surface on their own. I think we disassociated and basically kept the secret and pretended, Marla said, until I got pregnant. And that's when I really started questioning my dad. Dad, this isn't right. I want to know about my mom. Becoming a mother herself cracked something open in Marla. The idea of raising a child while knowing almost nothing about the woman who had raised her, the woman whose murder had defined her family without ever being discussed, became impossible to live with. She wanted to know about her mother, and underneath that she wanted to know what had happened to her. There was a reason the silence in the Waldman family ran so deep, and it wasn't only grief, it was suspicion. In the years after Barbara's murder, gossip had circled around her husband. Some neighbors and some relatives quietly wondered whether Jerry Waldman could have been involved in his own wife's killing. His remarriage just 6 months after the murder didn't look good to people inclined to whisper. And on Long Island in the 1970s, people whispered. As children, the Waldman kids heard more than once that people were suspicious of their father. So the cloud settled over Jerry Waldman and over the entire family, and it stayed there for decades. The children grew up not only without their mother, but under the shadow of a question about their father. Whether the man raising them, the man who tucked them in and paid the bills, and remarried and kept their mother's pictures off the walls, could have been the one who took her away. Then, in 2004, as DNA matching techniques continued to evolve, police say Jerry Waldman provided detectives with a swab of his own genetic material. The comparison was run against the evidence preserved from the 1974 crime scene, and it cleared him. According to his children, that was the moment their father was formally ruled out as a suspect. The moment the cloud that had hovered over him for 30 years was finally lifted, not by rumor or opinion, but by science. But it was an incomplete kind of justice. Jerry Waldman was cleared of suspicion, but he still had no answer. He still did not know who had walked into his home and murdered his wife, the mother of his 3 children. He died a couple of years later, never learning the name of the man responsible. He went to his grave knowing only that it wasn't him, and that the world had spent 30 years wondering whether it was. For Marla, her father's death sharpened her need to know into something harder and more focused. She became, in her own words, a little bit obsessed. She started watching true crime shows, studying how cold cases got solved, what evidence made them break open after decades. And every single year, she called the Nassau County Police Department to ask about her mother's case. Every year, she was told the same thing. The case could not be reopened without new evidence, and every year, she called anyway. A daughter on the phone with a homicide department, year after year, asking the same question, getting the same answer, refusing to stop asking. Then in December 2022, her phone lit up. Her family members were, in her words, blowing up my phone. The reason was a name in the news. Richard Cottingham, a convicted serial killer, had admitted to murdering 5 Long Island women in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The same time frame, the same region, the same kind of victims as Barbara Waldman. For Marla, this looked like the break she had been waiting on for half her life. She and her brother immediately reached out to detectives and to the district attorney's office. And the timing, the new attention, the possibility of a connection to a confirmed serial killer was enough. It got their mother's case reopened. And for the first time in nearly 50 years, a full DNA profile was extracted from the evidence that had been preserved at the 1974 crime scene. I was beyond happy, Marla said. I can't even explain it like euphoria, because in my mind, whether it was Cottingham or not, we had a full profile of the person that killed my mom. So after watching all those shows, I'm like, I'm going to find out who it is regardless. That is the turning point of the entire case, and it is worth sitting with. The profile didn't solve anything by itself, but it existed now. After decades of nothing, there was finally a complete genetic fingerprint of the person who had killed Barbara Waldman. Whoever he was, he now had a profile waiting for him. The DNA, it turned out, did not match Richard Cottingham. The serial killer whose confession had reopened the case was not the man who murdered Barbara Waldman. The lead that cracked the door open led, in the end, to someone else entirely. But Marla was undeterred. She pushed Nassau County Police to bring in the FBI to get access to more advanced DNA techniques than the local department could apply on its own. I'm not letting this go, Marla remembers saying. It is not happening. The FBI agreed to take the case and to try to identify the suspect using investigative genetic genealogy. The technique works differently from the old criminal databases. Instead of searching for the suspect's own DNA among convicted offenders, it compares the unknown profile against the genetic data that millions of ordinary people have voluntarily uploaded to consumer ancestry platforms, hoping to learn about their own family histories. From there, genealogists identify distant relatives who share segments of DNA with the unknown profile, and they build family trees outward and then inward, narrowing the field generation by generation until the branches converge on a single person. The forensic evidence was brought to Othram, the Texas laboratory that specializes in building usable genetic profiles from old and degraded crime scene material, and that developed the suspect's DNA profile. From there, the FBI's forensic genetic genealogy team and Nassau County investigators went looking for the relatives whose DNA would, without their ever knowing it, point back toward a killer. I knew they were going to find the person, Marla said. I didn't know who that person would be, and it was a little scary because at that point it could be anybody. It could be a neighbor. It could be a family member. That fear is real, and it's part of what makes genetic genealogy such a strange kind of hope. When you ask a family tree to give up a killer, you don't get to choose whose branch it lands on. It could be a stranger. It could be someone you knew. Marla had spent decades watching suspicion poison her own family from the inside. Now she was asking science to deliver a name, with no control over whose name it would be. A year and a half after the case was reopened, that phone rang by the pool in Missouri. We have a match. Marla fell to her knees. The name was Thomas Generazio. He had lived in the Waldman's Oceanside neighborhood at the time of Barbara's death, less than 4 miles from the house on Sally Lane. He worked as a sanitation worker in the area, a detail investigators noted carefully, because it meant he may have serviced the Waldman neighborhood itself, may have had a reason to be familiar with those streets and those homes, may have known the rhythms of who came and went and when. He had never been mentioned in the original 1974 case file. Not once. He had a prior record, arrests for assault and for possession of stolen mail. But he had never been connected to Barbara Waldman's murder in any way during his lifetime. He had simply lived nearby, worked his route, raised a family, and grown older in the same community where a young mother had been murdered in her own home and left for her children to find. Thomas Generazio died of cancer in 2004 at the age of 57, the same year, by a grim coincidence, that Jerry Waldman gave the swab that finally cleared his own name. The real killer and the wrongly suspected husband, both leaving the picture in the same year, neither of them named, the truth sitting dormant in a database that didn't yet know how to read it. But the DNA match alone was not enough to close the case. As Nassau County Police explained to Marla, DNA alone does not always constitute probable cause. Sometimes further investigation is necessary. So Marla dug in again. This time, her goal was to connect Thomas Genealogy to the man in that 1974 sketch, the figure in the snorkel coat with the fur-trimmed hood. She researched where he had lived and worked in her hometown. She combed through local records. She contacted his family members, one after another. She filled an entire whiteboard with names, dates, places, and notes from countless conversations, building the kind of case file that detectives build, except she was a victim's daughter doing it from her own home. I became obsessed with him, Marla said. I called people from the yearbook who were his friends, and just really delved into who was this person. Over the course of many months, she spoke with several of Genealogy's children, some of whom she said had never even met their father, and eventually, she connected with one of his daughters. The two of them talked on the phone and exchanged messages for days. That daughter sent Marla several photographs of her father, and in one of them, Thomas Genealogy was wearing a coat with a fur-lined collar, strikingly similar to the one depicted in the 1974 police sketch. That photograph became a key piece of evidence, helping to link Genealogy to the figure neighbors had described walking away from the Waldman house on the day Barbara was killed. A composite sketch from 1974 and a family snapshot separated by decades, showing the same coat. Genealogy's daughter, who later spoke on the condition of anonymity, citing privacy concerns, said she did not believe the photo proved her father matched the sketch, and that she could not imagine him killing anyone. That, too, is part of this story, and it deserves to be named. The family's on the other side of the answer. The children who absorb the weight of what a relative did, who never asked to be connected to a murder, who have to carry a name forward into the rest of their lives. Marla's relentlessness gave her family an answer. It also handed another family a permanent question. Ultimately, police said it was the totality of the evidence, the DNA, the investigative genetic genealogy, the interviews, the photographic images, that brought the case to its conclusion. In March 2026, more than 52 years after Barbara Waldman was murdered in her own home, the Nassau County Police Department announced that Thomas Genealogy was responsible for her killing. At the press conference, Nassau County Police Commissioner Patrick Ryder described what Genealogy had done that day in 1974.
Violent sexual assault against the mother, and then put a bullet in the back of her head as she laid on the floor tied up with the stockings that she was wearing.
We would have liked to have seen him in jail for that entire time, Ryder said, for that brutal murder that he did, the animal that he was that day, taking that mother from her 3 children. Just inexcusable. But Thomas Genealogy had been dead for more than 20 years. Because he was deceased, no criminal charges would ever be filed. There would be no trial, no sentencing, no day in court. The case was simply officially closed. For Marla, even an answer without a courtroom was worth everything she had poured into it. Being able to say it to the world, she said,
"Although this will not bring our mother back or undo childhood traumas, it has allowed my brothers and I to achieve a sense of peace and relief."
That felt so rewarding. I'm never going to get my mom back. I mean, that's a given, right? She's not coming back. It did open up some really messed up memories and painful things. But some of those memories were very good memories that I should cherish. For Eric, the boy who found his mother on the floor when he was 5, the resolution couldn't undo what he had seen. "It doesn't bring my mom back at the end of the day," he said. "I'm still sad and I wish she was here. But I'm happy because we don't have to wonder now who did it." The wondering was its own kind of wound, running parallel to the grief for all those years. For 52 years, the Waldman children carried not just the loss of their mother, but the suspicion that had wrapped itself around their father, the quiet, corrosive question that all that silence in the house had been built to contain. The answer didn't just name a killer. It confirmed, beyond any doubt, that the man who raised them was innocent, and it freed his memory from a rumor he had carried to his grave. Thomas Genealogy lived for 30 years after Barbara Waldman's murder. He grew older in the same Oceanside community. He worked his route. He raised children of his own, some of whom never knew him. And he died without anyone ever knocking on his door, never named, never charged, his profile absent from every file for 3 decades. The answer was never in the original investigation, never in the boxes of interviews and tip sheets. It was waiting in a family tree he didn't know existed, and in the refusal of a daughter who was 6 years old when her mother died to ever stop asking the question. After years of working what felt like a full-time job on her mother's case, Marla said she ended up closer to Barbara than she had ever been in her life. "I feel good about that," she said. "I know who she was. She was a beautiful, beautiful person, a wonderful mother and a friend. And she had a message for every other family still sitting in the silence she had finally broken out of. There is an answer to every single murder," Marla said. "Someone knows something. I truly believe that." She urged other families to dig in, to persevere, to find the strength and hold on to the hope. "Because if you're not persistent," she said, "if you don't have the guts, it's not happening. You have to really find the strength and have the hope." If this case stayed with you, leave a comment below. Tell us what you make of it. A mother of 3, a sketch no one could place, a husband who died under a shadow that was never his, and a daughter who refused to stop calling. Hit like and subscribe if you want more cases like this one. Crime View Central. We'll see you in the next one.